Welcome back, everybody, to another thrilling episode of Thrive as Your Programming Coach 2J. This is your host, Jeremy Jones, and today we're going to talk about how not every day needs to be a beatdown and some more fun stuff about loaded carries. So this is a conversation that we need to have with people on a regular basis, just because CrossFit, because of the way we record things, because of the group atmosphere, because of all the stuff people post online, people always tend to push themselves a little too hard, right? They tend to go, they may not even be feeling that good when they go to the gym, but then they start moving, they start feeling better. There's this peer pressure environment, and then they go too hard, or they think that, that if they're not getting totally crushed every class, then they're not getting a good workout. And part of that also has to do with the fact that when you start CrossFit, every workout is a beatdown, right? And even if you have a really good coach holding you back the whole time, it still always feels harder than it looked on paper, right? And then as your body starts to adapt and you start having better technique and everything starts getting better, well then the workouts, you start to go faster and faster and heavier and faster. And when ultimately they should start to feel easier, they shouldn't be as taxing on the body. But people keep chasing that side effect of the intensity that just feels so crushing. And so that it doesn't mean that that's not, we don't want to have those things happening, that stimulus coming up regularly, but it's not a requirement, and not every day needs to be a beatdown. And we did some pretty brutal stuff the last couple days, and we've got some other stuff planned later this week. So we've got this workout in, especially for people who are coming, 5 days in a row or whatever. Breaking it up with something like this is a good way to. We still came in, we got work done, we got better as humans, but we can maintain this sort of regimen. We can maintain this schedule without getting hurt. And so we need to disconnect people's attachment to that beat down feeling. It's not a requirement for results. So we got a pretty aggressive warm up because it is a fairly easy day, and we want to practice some stuff before we go into some stuff that's going to show up later this week. So remember, these dynamic warm ups a lot of times are not just what we're doing that day. Sometimes I'm kind of preloading some things that are going to show up later in the week, kind of like what I do with the skill practice warm-ups. And then we're going to do some shoulder activation stuff. I do recommend you guys work on kind of pulling the scapula back, right? So when people do bench presses, one of the important things that they do is we don't want to see them their shoulders rounding up. So they're pressing up here, their head's right here. We don't want to see this gap between their shoulder and the bench. And so what they need to do is pull their shoulder blades together so that they're see if I can draw it. Is it going to zoom in? Dang it. Oh, let's draw it from here. So what we want to see is that their back is flat, so that the weight of the bar is pressing through their scapula, through their shoulder blade, directly onto the bench. It's one of the reasons why having the proper width bench is so important, not too narrow. So working on activation stuff that's going to help people activate their lats and pulling their shoulder blades together. Those are good things for before we do bench presses. In addition to just basic shoulder mobility stuff. And then we're going to spend a good amount of time teaching the bench press. It's not one of the most common movements that we see, so we just want to make sure everyone understands proper technique, using their legs, the arch in the back and how that affects the bench press, not picking their butt up, how to spot each other without being creepy, and all those sort of things. So just make sure you spend a little bit extra time. You may not spend this much time when you're doing something like a deadlift, just because even though it is an advanced complex movement, you don't have to spend as much time necessarily, because we do it fairly often, where the bench press, not only is it's a risky movement because it's the most dangerous in the gym, but it's also you have the whole combination when you're having to work with a spotter, which is also a whole nother skill set. So don't rush people into that. That's why we didn't do a skill practice warm-up today. And then we're going to pair this with some single leg dumbbell deadlifts, one of my favorite movements. Just make sure people are doing these properly. If they can't do it where they're doing the full, I'm going to draw it with a slightly bent knee. Oh no, I did it again. Dang it, I hate when that happens. Slightly bent knee, we want it to be fairly straight, but some people can't balance with their back legs sticking straight out, right? So if their head's over here and they're holding the dumbbells or whatever. If they can't balance, it's okay to have them just drop their leg back and put their toe on the ground, right? Just to kind of help keep their balance, and it helps keep their hips square. We don't want to see rotating of the hips, so the back leg, the free leg hip sometimes rotates up to the ceiling when they're doing this. We really want to keep it straight. You can tell them, imagine you're leaning over a handrail, right? So there's like a bar that's going across, and you want to keep the iliac crest, the hip bone, touching that bar the whole time, or like a chain or something like that, like they're reaching over a handrail to pick something up, and so they're not letting that other leg rotate up. And so if they're having trouble balancing, or they're having trouble with that hip rotation, sometimes leaving that toe just lightly touching the ground can really make them feel more confident, so they can get a full range of motion here on these movements. And then we got our skill session carries. We did this one back in November, so it's been 4 or 5 months or whatever. But it is a fun way to incorporate something that we don't see show up a lot in Metcons, and it's not something I'm usually going to program as a strength movement. It is a strength movement, but it's not so much of a movement that is going to produce a lot of hypertrophy or power or strength gains. So instead of having it be the strength movement of the day, I like to incorporate it into something like this, like the skill work. But who knows? In the future, we may see it show up as the strength. It's also hard to do in a class, when you do it as the strength. That's one of the reasons why this is a little bit more free flow. What you're going to want to do is obviously have people warm up with some of these movements and have all the implements and stations set up. So you'll have a place for barbell carries, and then people can take turns. Now, some people may not do any overhead carries. They may just work on front rack and back rack carries, almost like a yoke. So they may not even do that, or they might just do some single arm or double arm kettlebells, but at a much lighter weight. And then the idea would be you kind of rotate through these, or you could do all of the overhead carries, then do a bunch of farmer carries, then do some yoke walks. Or you could do a couple sets of each and then go back. But we're going to spend about 15 minutes. And so if people want to spend a little more time on one rather than the other, that's totally fine. But the reason why carries are so good, especially after doing something like bench press, is things like farmer carries are really good for the shoulders. After doing anything that's very pec dominant, helping people say, like Dan John says, basically a carry, especially an overhead carry, a farmer carry, and a yoke carry, are like doing vertical planks, right? Or dynamic planks. It's a plank movement. So we're really training the musculature of the trunk and the core, and also the upper thoracic. So we're also thinking about like the shoulders and the upper back to have proper posture, especially when, like I said, when we're doing farmer carries. And so when we do those after we have a lot of chest stuff, it's really good for stretching those muscles out and kind of recentering everything so that they don't end up with shoulder issues down the road. Now, some people may want to do this and really kind of get after it, so they might go a little bit lighter and go more reps. Other people might just try to see how heavy they can go. If you don't have yokes, if you can use the axle bars, if you have some of those, that's another way. The problem with some yoke walks, when you start going, because people are going to use weights heavier than their back squat weight, it really is uncomfortable with the small diameter of the barbell. So if you can use an axle for them to do that, that's also a really good option. But that's why axles are designed, or excuse me, yokes are designed with very large bars, is because it doesn't cut into the tissues above the spine as much. But yeah, that's kind of fun. And then one thing I don't have on here is you can do Zercher carries, which is where you hold the bar in the crook of the elbows in the front, which is another fun one you can incorporate in there for folks to do. And again, it's kind of a day just to kind of play around. If they want to log this, they can log it in whatever system they're using, so they know how much they can do a yoke walk or how much they can do a farmer carry. Now, again, if you don't have any of the special equipment, you can just have them do farmer carries with kettlebells or dumbbells. You can have them do the barbells. Just make sure that they're picking them up in the center so they don't end up plowing the front of the barbells into the ground when they do that. Same thing with the yokes. You could have them just use barbells. You can hang the weights off with the bands, which I've talked about before, just to kind of change it up so it's not just all barbell stuff. But you can definitely do this stuff without all the special equipment. But if you have the special equipment, even better. Now, if people haven't been doing that much this week, or maybe they've had a few days off and they want to get a little bit more work in, they can do this. They can do the cash out here with some lunges and some burpees, or they can do some body weights or some bodybuilding stuff, some hypertrophy. That's it for today, guys. Thanks a lot, and thrive on.